Already we're seeing emotional scenes from inside the church there in Houston before the service actually starts. As I say, I don't think we're that far away from the service actually commencing. Let's bring in Jane O'Brien, our correspondent, who's there for us outside of the church and has been there for days. And Jane, you've been speaking to so many people there in Houston in the last couple of days. Just give me a sense of what people have been saying to you in just the last 24 hours with that memorial service yesterday and now today.
So many people who were here yesterday and went to see George Floyd lying in his coffin. It was an open coffin in the end. There were reports it would be closed, but they said to see his face and to see the reality of his death was a transformative experience for them, because it brought home the reality of the difficulties facing so many African Americans in America, and the problems of racism. They also pointed out that not all police are bad. They say that time and time again, but one of the most powerful examples I was given was by a young African American woman who said, when we fly on an aeroplane, you don't say, not all pilots are bad, there's only a few, because you trust them to get you from A to B safely without crashing the plane. There's no room for the bad apples when it comes to airline pilots, and that's how it should be for America's police forces. There is no room for bad apples. They should be weeded out. They shouldn't be allowed to continue working as police. And I think that encapsulates the type of reform that so many protesters are hoping to see. A police department, a police force in America that has no time for anybody guilty of misconduct or racism or treating African Americans differently to other people that they may come into contact with in the community. So it was a very powerful moment being here, listening to those voices, listening to people also give their examples of how they've encountered racism. The number of women who said that they have conversations with their husbands, their uncles, their sons, their brothers, who worry about when they leave the house, particularly at night, whether or not they're going to encounter the police, whether or not they're going to come back alive. All those conversations, I think George Floyd's public viewing yesterday gave people the chance to talk to each other, to air those grievances, some of which have been buried for many, many years, but are now being given fresh voice and a new opportunity to actually come together, bear witness, understand and move forward.
And Jane, some of those thoughts reflected in what we heard from Joe Biden, saying this was a pivotal moment. But when people talk about change, they're hopeful this time there will be real change. Has opinion coalesced about what they mean by the actual change they want?
Not at all. And I think this is the real difficulty going forward from here. There is already division over whether or not the police should have funding removed. This was one of the demands from protesters early on. It's happened in Minneapolis, or certainly the council in Minneapolis has voted to defund the police, dismantle the police. But what exactly they're going to put in its place is still up for debate, and it's also debatable whether they can actually do that, because of course, Matthew, the police unions in America are incredibly powerful, and this is one of the reasons why so many officers who have been guilty of misconduct, who have been charged with offences, have not been prosecuted or even disciplined, because of very tight police contracts that are monopolised by the unions, and the unions so far have given no indication that they are ready to change. So there is very much a long way to go. And you mentioned Joe Biden just now. Well, he also has said he's not in favour of defunding or removing funding from police departments. And just about half an hour ago, the police chief of Houston Police Force said that this was a false argument, that it wasn't an either or, that people didn't want fewer police, they wanted better police. and that's where the focus should be. So a lot of disagreement over how to move forward, what change looks like, and while people have the momentum right now, I think the real challenge for activists and protesters is how to keep that momentum going, particularly as this is the final day of memorials and George Floyd will be buried in the next few hours by the side of his mother, how to keep that momentum going and how to use it as a catalyst for real and lasting change.
And Jane, just to touch momentarily on some of the politics, we've talked about Joe Biden, but President Trump, well, he has tweeted today about that 75-year-old protester in Buffalo that was pushed over, that video that went viral, pushed over by police officers, describing it as a setup. Extraordinary to tweet something like that on a day like today.
Extraordinary, but that's what we've come to expect. And I think that even members of Donald Trump's own party, other senior Republicans, are now openly uncomfortable with the way that he has handled this entire situation over the last couple of weeks. The Republican Party for so long has stood as the party of law and order, and that is a mantra that Donald Trump claimed for himself and seems to be promoting above the broader message of these protests that police reform is now considered necessary by the majority of Americans. And that's African Americans, white Americans, Americans of all ages, of social divides, of different political persuasions. And there is a sense, I think, among certainly Democrats, but also among some Republicans, that he has missed the zeitgeist, that in trying to play to his own base, he is missing the broader point and is really out of tune with what a lot of Americans now think. And this type of inflammatory tweet is also does a disservice perhaps to the police themselves at a time when there is so much mistrust. To suggest that something was a setup does not instill confidence among people who have already had their confidence shaken.
And exactly on that point, Jane, it's been interesting looking at some of the polls which seem to suggest that this death has changed opinion amongst white Americans in perhaps a way that previous deaths has not.
And that is again something that's been emphasized to me time and time again in Minneapolis, where almost all the protesters were white. That was very, very striking to hear in Houston, where the mourners yesterday were predominantly black. But what the black mourners were telling me that was without the white protesters, this movement, like so many others, would fizzle and die. They need the majority, and that is what they feel they're now getting. They feel that they have white sentiment on their side. This is not being dismissed as an isolated incident. There is now a broader recognition that racism in America is a problem, and it's a problem not just for African Americans, but the whole of society, and the whole of society needs to tackle it. Very, very striking in the